Well, hiya, BookTube. Bill Ruttenberg here with the Ruttenberg Library, and I wanted to talk to you about a book I recently read. I just got done reading George Washington, The Forge of Experience, 1732 to 1775 by James Thomas Flexner. And so I wanted to kind of, sit down and give you a book chat about my thoughts on the book. So this is a good book. I thoroughly enjoyed it. It has 390 pages in it, 345 of which are actual text. The rest of it's the appendix and the bibliography and the index. So this comes from Little Brown and Company out of Boston. It's a 1965 book. It does have some pretty cool, if you see the end papers there, it's maps of the French and Indian War. It's got that on both of the end papers are the same. I thought that was really cool. I always like when the publisher decorates the end papers. I think that's kind of neat. It in the middle has some black and white photos. I really like some of these. I really like this one because it shows the stages of Mount Vernon, because it was not always the beautiful house that we see today. But then it's also got some paintings in here. So there's Martha and George Washington's two stepkids. It's got some stuff from inside Mount Vernon, inside the house, gifts and looks like let's see here, a picture of the coat of arms and stuff like that. And here's some miniature photos. So I really like the black and white photos, and then of course the most famous painting of George Washington in his early time period. I like the color version of this. It's very vivid if you ever get a chance to see the color version of this. But anyway, I really enjoyed this book. It's the first volume of a 4-volume set. It was a pretty good read. The flow of the writing, there's a natural flow to it. It's not too stiff. It's maybe not what some of the biographies are today as far as the flow of the writing. Some of the biographies today can flow a little bit better. You can tell the time period it's written in, but it reads easily. And so anyway, so I've got a few notes here I'd like to go through as I talk about this, and hope you enjoy this. So throughout the book, like early on, right from the get-go, and then throughout the whole book, Flexner really hits on George Washington's relationship with his mother. It was kind of a rocky relationship, according to Flexner. Martha really comes across, or not Martha, I am sorry, Mary really comes across as a very self-centered woman, and she kind of comes across as a pain in Washington's neck, and Washington does not spend a lot of time with his mother because of how she treats him, I think. And she blocks a lot of times where he maybe could have advanced himself, by getting into maybe the British Navy or stuff like that, and she blocks Washington from that. And I think, or I feel that Washington really holds almost a grudge against her. And throughout the book, it talks about how his mother's always looking for money and is just never happy with anything. And so that gets hit on in the book. Another thing that gets hit on is Washington's how he allows others to help advance him in life. He meets some key friends. I'll call them key friends in high places. He makes friends with the neighboring Fairfax family, and they do a lot for him. They offer him survey work, and so he gets to go see the West and just get some opportunities that maybe other people in his position wouldn't have. And in the meantime, his best friend, I think it was George William Fairfax, if I got my name right. Hopefully I do. But George William Fairfax marries Sally Fairfax. And, well, I can't remember what her maiden name was. But anyway, she becomes Sally Fairfax. And one of the things that they hit on in this, that Flexner hits on in the whole book, is his early love affair with Sally Fairfax. Now, this isn't this love affair was not physical. It was purely a emotional love affair. It was, she became basically his first love, and he really hits on that and the impact that that has on his young life, and how that carries forward all the way through life. How he never ever forgets her, and you see authors or historians when they talk about that, some of them play up that love affair, that first love, and other ones kind of just do it as, yeah, it was a short fling and then it was done. But he carries that throughout life and how strong it was. Talks a lot about the flirting back and forth, and I just thought he did a good job of handling it, though, and how that was never, despite what some people think, it was never a physical relationship. He never, according to Flexner, never stepped across the line. So anyway, he hits on that. I thought probably throughout the book, one of the biggest things that Flexner covers that I think he does an excellent job in is making George Washington look like a real human being, where some authors, especially early authors, like to give him godlike status. He was like a Roman statue basically, and Flexner doesn't do that. Flexner allows us to see the real man. He talks about some of the positive traits that he has, but he really also hits on the negative side of Washington, the flaws, and he blends that into the making of Washington. It is the forge of experience, forging those early experiences into the man that he will become. And he hits those flaws without pulling any punches, I think that was awesome, because it makes Washington become, one of the reasons this is readable is because Washington becomes a real human being. He's more approachable to the average person. It isn't just this stiff figure that nobody can really relate to. You can actually relate to him and relate to the issues that he has in his young life, where he goes off the beaten path and makes mistakes, and learns from the mistakes. And so Flexner really hits on that, and I enjoyed that part of it. A lot of this book deals with the French and Indian War and the impact that it had on young Washington's life. Matter of fact, I would venture to say the majority of this book does that. And so it really centers around the impact the French and Indian War has on him and in the colonies itself. And a quote that I pulled out that I thought was kind of cool, and I'm going to use it in my class, because when I'm teaching the assassination and then Fort Necessity, and on the events that happened just prior to Edward Braddock's march towards Fort Duquesne and that whole debacle. In this, Flexner says, he's talking about the Indian style of fighting, and I found this interesting, a great way to explain stuff to my kids at school. But he's talking about how the Half-King abandoned Washington when they were at Fort Necessity, and it kind of explains why this is. And I think this is a key, because it shows the drastic differences between the Indian style of fighting and the British and sometimes the French style of fighting. And he says, and this is from page 101, he says, "Few Indian nations could muster more than 100 warriors. As their military strength depended altogether on their manpower, no chief considered a single brave expendable. To inflict loss without suffering any was the object of Indian generalship. This was why their favorite tactic was ambush. Exposing compatriots to annihilation by a vastly superior enemy seemed to them not only madness but barbarism." And I thought that was, a great way to explain the differences in the styles of fighting. The Indians just didn't have the men that were expendable. They couldn't afford to lose all those men, and so their intelligence tells them don't do that, and so they would do sneak attacks, ambush, guerrilla style fighting. And one of the things that I think that we get out of this is Washington will pick up on this early in life. He will pick up on the Indian style of fighting, because later on, flash forward to the next book when it talks about the American Revolution, one of the things that Washington constantly faces is a vastly superior British force to his minuscule amount of soldiers that he has fighting for him and the militia, and he has to find ways to deal with the odds. The odds were stacked against him big time, and so he's going to remember back to these early times with the Native Americans when they were fighting. They didn't go head to head. They couldn't go head to head. And so I think this is going to be one of those key lessons later in life. And by the way, that is another thing I really like about this book. I think I forgot to put it on my list of notes, but Flexner does an excellent job of taking these events early on and flash forwarding to the future in how these are going to, these experiences in young Washington are going to greatly affect his decision making later in life. And I thought that was really nice on how he kind of flash forwards and connects those dots for the reader. When we get done with Fort Necessity, of course, the Articles of Capitulation got signed. The French had pretty much forced Washington to sign. And Flexner does an interesting thing here that I hadn't thought about, and maybe I've read it before and I just didn't remember, but he hints at the French kind of tricked Washington. And I have read about how Washington didn't understand French. He didn't have the schooling and signed a document that he didn't know what he was signing. I've read all of that. But Flexner was talking about that the French kind of tricked him. They knew he couldn't quite understand what he was signing. And when Washington asks for some British demands in this surrender, the French are going to be willing to concede in a few areas and allow him to march out with his colors, let his men go home without being taken prisoner, take their weapons with them as long as they go. They're willing to concede all this because at the same time, when Washington puts his name on the dotted line, he is signing off on that he assassinated Jumonville. And that with that assassination, this war officially becomes his fault. And so he kind of hints at the French. The French knew he couldn't understand what he was signing, and they kind of cornered him. And of course, Washington throughout his life says, "I didn't know what I was signing," and didn't understand any of that. Now, so we move on here. Flexner really hits on how the British did not trust colonials. And this really hurts Washington in his young career because the one thing that he really wanted to do, because of his financial situations and not being the firstborn son and all that kind of stuff, he faces a little bit of hardship as far as where he ranks as in the order of being born. And so he is not allotted that great education. He's not allotted maybe as much land and slaves as his brothers had. So he is relying on the military to be his stepping stone up in life. And his ultimate goal is to become a British officer. He really wants to get into the British Army. And the British just deny him time and time again. And it becomes this there's a lot of hardship between the two, or a lot of Washington gets to where he doesn't like the British, and the British, they tend not to trust colonials in military affairs, and rightly so. After what Washington shows at Fort Necessity with all of the mistakes there, building a fort in the low ground, not clearing his field of fire, signing off on an assassination. There's good reason not to trust him. He does a lot of dumb stuff. And so they're not willing to put the British military in his hands. And so these were some thoughts that I took note of from page 108 from General Lord Albemarle. He was the British ambassador to France, and he's writing to the Duke of Newcastle. And this was his thoughts. Washington and many such may have courage and resolution, but they have no knowledge or experience in our profession. Consequently, there can be no dependence on them. So they didn't trust him. And of course, he's taking it personal, like he hasn't done his duty. He's done his duty, he just hasn't done it very well. He's made dumb mistakes, and he does not understand that at all. And he takes it personal. So in his moving forward here, in his younger years, Washington makes a lot of enemies in this whole thing because he feels slighted he's writing letters. You know, he's got his immediate boss, and he's writing letters over their heads, over his head, to others in higher command, and he's basically trash talking his boss, and that is never good. You climb the ladder, you know, you do not go over your boss's head. That is just something you do not do. And there's an order of operations. And Washington felt slighted, and so he skipped the order of operations and was writing a lot of letters to legislators. He was writing letters to, you know, just various people in the military, and he makes a ton of enemies. He alienates a lot of people doing this, and this is definitely not going to help his move towards promotion. He wants to be promoted, but this is definitely not helping him. One of the things that we do find that early on, after he gets out of the military, is that he picks up a wife. He picks up a plantation. You know, his brother dies, leaves him the plantation. His wife, Martha, her previous husband had died. She's the richest widow in Virginia, and he takes full advantage of that and marries her. And she was quite the catch. You know, she is probably the perfect helpmate for him. And they make a good couple. And while he builds up this plantation with this new wife and all of the slaves that he had, he is learning how to run an army through his plantation. He learns how to lead men. He, you know, we were watching a movie at school, and one of the authors or historians in the documentary we were watching puts it perfectly. He learns how to run this plantation, and he finds himself running more people, you know, dealing with more people on his plantation than he ever does in his when he becomes president. And so he learns how to lead men through not only his experiences in the French and Indian War, but also through the running of his plantation. So as time moves forward, one of the other things that we see is he gets a lot of misgivings towards the British. He's already got this feeling of distrust because of his military experiences, but now he is trying to, you know, he's gotten out of the military, he's running his plantation, and he's trying to become a Virginia gentleman. Well, in order to do that, he needs to basically become a rich man. He needs to build up his finances. He needs to have the fine things in life around him. And what we find is he begins to become bitter towards the British. He feels that, you know, the merchandise that he is buying from the British is marked up higher than what the average British person would pay. He finds that the items he's being sold are defective, and he takes all this personal. His tobacco that he's trying to sell to the British is being sold at lower amounts than what other people's tobacco is being sold, and he feels he's being slighted there, and he takes it personal. And you know, as he's getting, you know, ripped off, it's creating a major rift between him and the British. He is becoming very callous to them, and so because he's not being treated right economically, and at the same time he's still got those ill feelings towards the French and Indians, or towards the British from the French and Indian War, you know, that those feelings are still simmering just at the surface, just below the surface. He definitely is having troubles forgiving and forgetting. And all of this is leading to the major rift, the major split with Britain heading into the Revolution. Flexner hits on the relationship between George Washington and Martha. It's not necessarily the great love affair. I think as time goes, he learns to love her. I think it was a marriage of convenience for both of them. I mean, that's what it kind of sounds like. And it also is a marriage of friendship. And that is really what makes their marriage so powerful, is the friendship, the bond between them. It's not necessarily the hot, flaming love. It is more the friendship. And Flexner really hits on this because later in the book, towards the end, Washington is writing letters to his step-grandchildren who are getting married, and he gives out that advice. You need to marry somebody that is your friend. friendship needs to be at the forefront of the marriage, because if you're not friends, it's going to be a rough go. You know, the hot and heavy love, passionate part of it, that's going to be there no matter what at the very beginning, and it'll later fade away. But friendship will always endure. And so Flexner really hits on that. And so you get this idea that that's what George and Martha's wedding or marriage was all about. It was about the friendship and the bond that got built between them and how they were each other's helpmate. He ends the book with talking about that buildup towards the revolution when he becomes the commander-in-chief. You know, it talks about his role in the House of Burgesses. It wasn't a huge role because he did not, you know, he wasn't a huge lawmaker. He was involved in it, he voted, but he was not the guy at the forefront writing the laws. And Flexner's very forward about that. And so when we get to that point where they're looking for people to go to the Continental Congress and that kind of stuff, Washington gets elected, but it's probably more as a figurehead, his name, the name recognition. Maybe not so much for his ability at lawmaking. And he is a popular name in Virginia. And so Washington gets sent as one of the delegates. And as he's going, I think the whole time he knew what he had in mind. He wanted to be at least a general in the Continental Army. That was to be. He wanted to lead men. He wanted his second chance. I think this is, you know, even though when the Congress votes him as the commander-in-chief and he walks out the door and he talks about this could be the ruin of my reputation. This could be, you know, I might not succeed. I truly feel, and Flexner, I feel alludes to this, that in the back of his head is his failures in the French and Indian War. It's not that it's going to ruin his reputation. I actually think this is going to make his reputation, and he knows it. This is going to fix his earlier failures. This is a way to become the comeback kid, so to speak, and make things right in his military experiences. And it also gives him a chance to take care of that bitterness towards the British. But anyway, and that's where the book leaves off. Those are my thoughts, my feelings for this book chat on George Washington, The Forge of Experience. BookTube, if you have anything to say about this, or you want to leave comments down below, please feel free to do that. I appreciate you watching. Hopefully you made it this far. Thank you for watching. I hope everybody's having a great reading experience. So until next time, happy reading.